Oliver Marchart is professor of political theory at the University of Vienna and has been a professor of sociology at the Art Academy in Düsseldorf. And I would say, as a political theorist, he transits really between the artistic theoretical, it works. Between the artistic field and the political theoretical discourse. Two of the most famous books that he's published that I think are particularly relevant to the discussion today are Conflictual Aesthetics from 2019 and About Antagonism. Maybe I'm remembering wrong, the Thinking Antagonism in 2018. So Oliver Marchart is working in a way, I would say, in the tradition of Ernest Laclau and Chantal Mouffe, thinking about antagonism, thinking about how political debate works and what political action is, but also citing maybe Arendt a lot, but trying to think about it also through artistic strategies and contemporary situations of political action. So today we hear a keynote thinking about parasites, but also about dancing, and which has been a topic in your work also in the past years. I leave it up to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Can you hear me? Is that okay? Thanks so much for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be among so many people whose work I really cherish. Not only Margit Wirth's work, but also Marie Rosenkanz's work, our previous speaker, and others. And my interest, basically, or one of my interests, is the relation between protest, street protest, and dance. So this will be about this. And I'm also grateful for being invited because it's very risky to invite someone like me because I'm not an artist, I am not a curator, I'm not an art historian, I'm a theorist, meaning that theorists, as you know, may make things more complicated than necessary. That's one part of it, and they have very few slides to show. So I'm going to, but I'm not going to show you any slides. I'm going to show you exactly 1 minute of dancing halfway through the talk. So please bear with me until we're there. So my talk is about dance as an ars parasitica. But what could we understand by that? Let's differentiate an ars parasitica from outright straight-in-your-face politics or artistic activism or artivism, if you wish. My claim is that parasitic art escapes the classical dichotomy or the classical dialectics between autonomy, autonomous art, whose main philosopher is Theodor Adorno, if you want, and heteronomy, art in the service of a particular cause, classically in the service of institutions such as the church or the court, or nowadays the art market. So autonomy has this term, the Greek term nomos, which is of course law in its name, and autonomy means that I have my own laws, I act according to my own laws, and heteronomy means that I receive laws from somewhere else, right? I'm subjected to other people's laws. So dancing in public can be, as a practice, either autonomous, in which case, you know, people dance as a form of public art, or it can be heteronomous. They dance within a political demonstration. They dance for the sake of supporting a political cause. So, for instance, in cases of activist practices. But in the case of what I would call parasitic dancing, or dance as an ars parasitica, the practice is neither a clearly autonomous nor heteronomous art form. Let me briefly walk you through these possibilities, three possibilities. I'm not going to give you any example of dance as autonomous art, right? Because that would be ridiculous to just have you go to the next show or the next performance, dance performance. When it comes to heteronomous or political dance, the practice of dancing is intrinsically connected to a political context. For instance, political protest. This is not new or a phenomenon of contemporary street protest. To just give you an example, in 1932, there was the Workers' Dance League established in New York City that assembled modern dances in the name of a political cause. It developed out of another group, the Red Dances, founded in 1928, and one of its slogans defined dance as being, and I quote, a weapon in the revolutionary class struggle. So you see, dance here is not an autonomous discipline, it's clearly in the service of something else, revolutionary class struggle. Now, what is negotiated in these cases is not only the relation between artistic practices and politics or political movements, it is also the role of the body in society. So there are much larger stakes in it than just, say, the support of a particular political demand. This becomes immediately clear if we look at the so-called Women Life Freedom movement, protests in Iran in 2022, and the more recent protest waves that have been bloodily oppressed. As you know, public dancing in these cases have become a prominent protest format in the struggle against the Iranian regime, not only because women were dancing without head covering, but because of a simple reason. Because dancing in public as such is officially proscribed in Iran. The mere fact of its prohibition changes the function or the political balance of dance. Dancing, not only public dancing, is as such charged with politics. Once being suppressed, dance becomes heteronymous. It is subjected to a law that is not its own law. And in this regard, it becomes intrinsically political. So that even when people dance privately in their homes, they not only dance, they resist. This exemplifies the intricate, perhaps paradoxical relation between heteronomy and autonomy. Dancing in private, one would expect, is an autonomous practice. You do it for its own sake or simply to have fun. But to the extent to which it is officially relegated by public authority to the private, it becomes a heteronymous practice because it's submitted to laws external to it. And this becomes all the more obvious once dancers re-enter the streets in the waves of protest we have witnessed in Iran. They reclaim their autonomy by resisting, on the one hand, by resisting the prohibitive law imposed on them by the regime, and they do this by joining a much larger form of political protest with much larger goals, the goal of toppling the regime. And in this sense, public dancing becomes heteronymous again, but this time because it becomes a weapon, to use the Workers' Dance League terminology, a weapon in the much larger struggle against the regime. Now, of course, much would have to be said about this case, maybe in the discussion if you want, anyway. And academic research has been done on the people publicly dancing in the Iran protest movements, many of which have subsequently been murdered by the regime. But maybe, and perhaps precisely of this reason, it is important to point out the most obvious, the basics, if you wish, the basic truism the dancing protesters in Iran, in my view, seek to transmit to a regime that wants to kill them. And this truism is, you cannot suppress an anthropological reality. You cannot keep people from dancing just for reasons of ideological or religious fanaticism, because we all dance. Dancing is something like a lived universality across all cultures. People dance, and they dance everywhere. And where it is banned, precisely because it is banned, it becomes an act of resistance. Now, if we look at so-called Western societies, to once more state the obvious, we can also find a religious tradition of perhaps not suppression, but denigration of dance. And this, to some degree, lives on in our post-religious world. And in this sense, dance, compared to other art forms, is perhaps the parasitic art form. It ranks at the bottom of the imaginary hierarchy of art forms. At the universities, there are departments for art history, but not for dance history, for musicology, but not for dance studies. Even within theater studies, dance research does exist, but leads a shadowy existence. And aesthetics, as a relevant subdiscipline of philosophy, is not known for its excessive interest in dance either. I'm not saying that dance is completely ignored, but it is on the margins of academic attention, and it has to parasitically attach itself to other, more legitimate disciplines and practices. Why is that? Of course, the body has been viewed with great suspicion in the West since Plato and Augustine. I'm not saying something particularly original when claiming that for centuries the body has been subordinated to the mind, to the idea, reason, in other words, the higher faculties of cognition. In theaters, for instance, this means that the members of the corps de ballet are something like the proletariat of the performing arts. Like actual proletarians, they work with their bodies. In actual fact, in the 19th century, the corps de ballet was socially close to the working class. Both dancers and proletarians had nothing else to offer but their bodies. Only a thin and often permeable line separated the female members of the corps de ballet, who often came from the lower classes, from sex work. In the late 19th century, the Foyer de la Danse at the Opéra Garnier in Paris functioned as a brothel. And yet, I would claim this is not the whole story. Hostility towards the body has been directed primarily at the moving body, not so much at the static body. In other words, Western culture is not hostile to statues. It's full of statues, actually. It's hostile to movement, or at least suspicious of movement. And why? For the same reason for which Ayatollah Khomeini was hostile to movement in 1977, because moving bodies, always threaten to cross the line into obscenity. Therefore, the church's hostility towards the body cannot be separated from its hostility towards pleasure, and thus its hostility towards dance. Unlike painting, music, sculpture, or architecture, dance is not considered by the church a sacred art. It is not an ars sacra. It is the opposite. It is, in the large sense of the term, an ars parasitica. So to put it as simply as possible, hostility towards the body implies hostility towards movement, in particular public movement. All this enmity, oppression is directed at public movement. And why would you want to prohibit public movement? Because it always, if only potentially, threatens to escalate and produce mass movements. Individually moving bodies threaten to assemble, to connect, to start flooding the streets, and potentially turn into a human avalanche. So if we were to establish an aesthetics of parasitic art practices, an aesthetica parasitica, dance, I argue, would certainly not be the only practice, but would be the first practice to begin with, at least for me. And this is because it is still considered to be parasitic upon other art forms, in the same way in which the corps de ballet is considered to be parasitic in the theatrical repertoire to the more legitimate forms of performative art, such as opera or drama. So that if there are budget cuts, the ballet, as a rule, might be considered dispensable first. And its subordinate position in the hierarchy of the arts, I suspect, is not simply a matter of taste. It has to do with the metaphysical dispositive of Western culture, with the fact that the medium of artistic expression, in the case of dance, is the body. And what is worse, the body is moving. However, and now we'll come to 1 minute of dancing. All these points are debatable, because you might be saying that times have changed, that the performative arts today are seen as an important economic factor, for instance, in city marketing. The famous dance companies are being financially supported, but I would claim these are rather exceptions. Anyway, you might debate the parasitic status of dance today, which is why I want to refine the notion of dance as an ars parasitica. And I would like to do this after having you shown this 1 minute of dancing in public. In this case, I claim we can speak about a parasitism that escapes the dialectics of heteronomy and autonomy. The performance I'm about to show you is, I will claim, both part of a social movement and not part of that movement. This links up to the impossible relation between autonomy and dependence you spoke about before. It is part of a protest and not part of a protest. It remains both within a counterpublic and outside a counterpublic, and in this sense, it is parasitic upon the movement, the public, and the political. Let's try it from the beginning. What you have just seen is episode 1418 from December 1, 2018 of what is an endurance project of the dancer Nadia Vadori-Gauthier entitled Une minute de danse par jour. For exactly 10 years, between January 2015 and January 2025, Vadori-Gauthier has taped herself dancing for roughly 1 minute every day without any exception. Her inspiration comes from Friedrich Nietzsche's famous phrase, "And lost be the day to us in which a measure hath not been danced." Und verloren sei uns der Tag, wo nicht einmal getanzt wurde. So Vadori-Gauthier did not let a single day pass by without dancing, in public, alone, or with strangers or friends, or in more private situations. As she herself explained her long-term project, and I quote, "With my minute of dance, I dance every day in the interstices of daily life. I slip between things with them. I accompany them an instant on their way. I summon the invisible, the unformed, the sensed. I don't aim at polemic or confrontation in a binary mode. I exist in multiplicity, interweaving, heterogeneity. Here, no uppercase A art, not representation, but an art, lowercase a, mingled with life, which becomes indissociable from it." So what her project is about is art with a lowercase a, is a bodily practice mingled in everyday life, is what I would describe as an ars parasitica in a strict sense, a practice of, in this case, dancing in the interstices of daily life, as she says, between things. Vadori-Gauthier also danced always for 1 minute on many political demonstrations. So I don't show you any cases of dancing, or her dancing in non-political circumstances, private, on the countryside, at the tram station, or whatever, you can imagine that. But she also danced on many political demonstrations. And of course, these are not hard to find if you're based in Paris. In the episode I presented, we see her dancing at a Yellow Vest protest. Again, there are certainly different ways of approaching this piece, but I would claim that any approach will have to reckon with the fact that the piece itself is inherently plural. First of all, it is only one episode from a huge sample of 3,654 one-minute dances. I must confess I haven't watched all of them. But then it's not entirely clear to what kind of genre all this belongs. Is it a conceptual piece? Is it an endurance performance? Is it some sort of video art? Has it to do with relational aesthetics? Does it create social situations of interaction? And most importantly, is there a political intention that would allow for calling it political art or even artistic activism? That is a heteronymous practice. On the contrary, is it simply dance for dance's sake? That is an autonomous practice. First of all, I think we need to take Vadori-Gauthier by her word when she says, "I summon the invisible, the unformed, the sensed." There is certainly a lot of unformed or not yet formed going on in this video. And there are many things indicated that either can be sensed, in this case visually and audibly, or could have been sensed on the spot, for instance the tear gas and the smoke and smell of burning barricades. How can we ever hope to analyze street protest without taking note of the sensual experience of politics in the making? Now, if we think about art as a sensual or bodily experience, we would turn to more contemporary or more fashionable theoretical approaches, but the classical philosophical discipline of aesthetics used to be engaged precisely with sensible experience. Aesthetics derives from aesthesis, the experience of our senses and through our senses, which was clear to the philosopher Alexander Gottlieb Baumgarten when he founded the discipline of aesthetics around 1750. For him, the so-called lower faculties of our soul, as opposed to the higher faculties of rationality, consists in the capability of registering things that, in his words, are obscure, confused, and cloudy, or as Vadori-Gauthier would have said, that are invisible, unformed, and sensed. And Baumgarten, in his book, provides us with a whole number of aesthetic subdisciplines. I don't go into it. He doesn't speak about a single aesthetics. He speaks about many different aesthetics, an aesthetica fantasia, the aesthetics of the faculty, the capability to imagine things, or the aesthetica mythica, the capacity to create fictions, and so on and so forth. And this leads me to conclude that there can be as many aesthetics as you can come up with, which is exactly why we could start thinking about an aesthetica parasitica. This is a faculty, a capability of acting, which has little to do with the higher faculties of reason and intellect cherished by liberal rationalists. It is a so-called lower faculty that has to do with the sensible realm, with sensibility in the widest possible sense. But by escaping the dialectics of heteronomy and autonomy, it can be said to be political and not to be political at the same time. To make things worse, or to make them even more paradoxical, I could even say the following. On the one hand, a parasitic practice is a political practice that attaches itself to something which, on the face of it, does not appear political, such as the everyday, the ordinary, the private, and so on, or in Vaudery-Gautier's usual interventions, the unpolitical interstices of daily life. But on the other hand, a parasitic practice is an apparently unpolitical practice that attaches itself to something that looks very much political, such as this yellow vest demonstration. In other words, the ars parasitica consists in a political intervention into the unpolitical, or in an unpolitical intervention into the political. Just think of Vaudery-Gautier's series of one-minute dances as interventions into the seemingly unpolitical everyday life. Why or in which sense are these parasitic practices political? Obviously, the whole series of one-minute dances has nothing to do with art for art's sake. To start with, it belongs to an artistic research project aimed at, according to her own testimony, investigating into local micro-political relationships between the dancer and the environment, people, and material. Her one-minute dances create micro-political situations in everyday life. So they should be interpreted as political interventions aimed at bringing to light the secret politicality of our daily life. That's a micro-political dimension of her parasitic practice. But on the other hand, in Vaudery's words, she says, or let's stick to this interventions into the everyday before coming to this intervention into politics. Vaudery-Gautier says, and I quote, "I dance as protesters demonstrate to effect a living poetry, to act through sensitivity against the violence of certain aspects of the world. This is the solution I found, an action to my own measure, a concrete, repeated action that may redraw lines, disrupt the design, shake up the norms." And this is why she describes une minute de danse par jour as a daily act of poetic resistance. So here we are. So parasitic dancing as a political intervention into the seemingly unpolitical world of the everyday, the ordinate, the private, in order to bring to light the latter's latent politicality. Yet the whole thing also works the other way around. Once an autonomous practice emerges within the context of political activism. And this is her one-minute dance at the Yellow Vest manifestation. It is not in itself a case of political activism, nor is it straightforward, traditional, autonomous art. And yet, the dance is not immediately decipherable as a practice of politics, even when taking place within a political manifestation. In this situation, where the protesters encounter the dancers, her political aim, should there be one, is not evident to them. On the contrary, the aim of the one-minute dance must have remained indecipherable for the Yellow Vest protesters, as we can tell from their irritated and amused reactions. The dancer, Vaudery-Gautier, does not seem to have a message. She does not carry a banner. She does not proclaim political slogans. On the contrary, she completely ignores the protesters. She even tries to ignore the tear gas as much as she can. Hence, there remains a moment of the indecipherable, the non-explicit, the obscure, as Baumgarten would have said, something of the order of the unpolitical, or rather the not explicitly political. And I would claim that we could read this moment as a parasitic remnant of autonomy, brought to the entirely heteronymous action of political protest, a parasitic attachment that is both autonomous and heteronymous, or neither of it. Because, of course, there is no such thing as complete autonomy. So even this remnant of artistic autonomy, parasitic upon heteronymous politics, can have a function within the yellow vest demonstration. And I would claim, and here I come to the end, that the potentially productive function of such a parasitic intervention is to open a space for reflection, of pause, or perhaps even backpedaling. Take note of the fact that the dancer in this video moves on the spot, does not go with the tide of the other protesters passing by. From a technical perspective, this is of course due to the fact that the camera is fixed. But from an artistic perspective, the fixed camera is just part of a dispositif of pausing within movement. For even if the dancer's body moves, it does not move with the protesters, nor does it move against them. Rather, it moves by not moving, or rests in moving, in a state somewhere between mobility and immobility. Her dance may thus function as a fixed point which is mobile in itself, just like a mobile by Alexander Calder. This fixed point, which is mobile but stays where it is, allows for the moving protesters, at least potentially, to also pause for a moment, reflect on their own movement, perhaps even to question their movement. Immobility or resistance to mobility may instigate a moment of self-reflexivity, perhaps even self-questioning. Not that it is guaranteed that such a moment occurs, but the dance for roughly 1 minute opens a temporal and spatial frame that could allow for such moment of self-questioning to occur. It is here, in this 1 minute vacuum, that we may encounter the political function of artistic autonomy. And we may encounter more than a political moment of attack, an ethical moment of hesitance that calls on us to stop for a moment, to not move on, to reflect on our own movements, or perhaps, as some do, joining Valérie Gauthier in dancing on the spot, in moving and not moving at the same time. Thank you for your attention. I hope it was not too long. Am I going to stay here, or